Hello and welcome. My name is Ryan Hardesty and I am the Executive Director here at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art at Washington State University. Thank you for joining us from wherever you may be this afternoon. We couldn't be more thrilled to share this live stream program with you in conjunction with the exhibition, Follow the River, Portraits of the Columbia Plateau. The exhibition's curator, Michael Holloman, is here with us to discuss his reframing of the museum's Worth D. Griffin collection of native portraiture. Michael is an associate professor at WSU's Department of Fine Arts and an enrolled member of the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation. We are so honored to have joining Michael an esteemed group of special guests. The program will begin with Nakia Williamson, Cultural Resources Program Director of the Nez Perce Tribe. Nakia will be followed by WSU Provost Elizabeth Chilton, and then on to Zoe High Eagle Strong, the Executive Director for Tribal Relations and Special Assistant to the Provost, as well as Director of the Center for Native American Research and Collaboration. Zoe will provide our land acknowledgement and context for it. After Michael's curatorial presentation, we will return to Nakia to conclude our time together. Before we begin, though, I'd like to quickly acknowledge this exhibition and this evening's program were made possible through the support of the Samuel H. and Patricia W. Smith Endowment. I also really want to give a thank you to WSU's Museum of Anthropology right here on our campus, and also the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture in Spokane, Washington. Both institutions made available really significant plateau cultural materials for loan for the exhibition. I think with all of that, why don't we now turn to Nakia Williamson for his remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Again, my name is Nakia Williamson, and I'm here in Lapwai, and I'm from the Nez Perce tribe, and I would like to kind of begin my remarks by addressing you in our own language, Nibiputim, which is a language that has existed on this landscape for thousands of years, since the beginning of time, and everything was put in order. So I'll begin my address by introducing myself, as well as a oration, I guess you might say, of the things that are important to us as people of this land. Taklai kina ka oikala kinwisi anunam in tutoka wanik ipelik hilum kawat ki slapway pama kinwisi kawako hanaka hits kali toksik yunam sapalit ka sapatkan hiwisi ka oikalo nunam ki tats piamkin ka nunam khalalain ka uyet ki Knox tamalwina ka kunku ka oikislik kinawatis pa ki Knox loud tips ka kanid ka timanit ka oikala kinawatis pa ka ikuin hiwas nunam sukwinawit ki ka kuna titlupama nunam tsukwa ka oikala titoken ki hiwas Knox ki nunam khalalain ka oikala ka kuus nunam ilakawat hiwasi ka oikala ki piam kin nunam titokana ka nagsapsik kin kina piam kin kuus hiwas ki Knox ki. On this day, I'm very thankful and introduce myself, my name that comes from this land, Ipelik Tilam Kawat, and that I'm glad to have this opportunity to address those that are here, that have joined virtually in this time that we're reminded of our life, our humanity as people. And for us, the first people of this land, it ties us, our language, our way of life, our culture. It ties us to this land in a very important way. That's why in my address, I spoke of the Indian foods that nourished our people that are still here on this land, that we have responsibilities to. I named those that dwell in the water, those that are the roots that follow them, and then those that are the berries that are gathered later on in the season, and stated them in order to remind ourselves of that big responsibility that we have to ourselves and to our ancestors. And so with this exhibit, I'm very thankful to see the images of these ancestors, some of them that have relations down here on the Nez Perce Reservation and that were connected by language and culture, because it reminds us not only the rights that they fought for as individuals, those leaders that signed those sacred documents, those treaties, first in 1855, but more so the responsibilities that our people have via our way of life and our understanding of how we are connected to the land and connected to what the non-Indian people refer as resources. So I'm glad to be here and to welcome you, and to also to this land that acknowledges us on this day, and to open up this time of sharing and this time of increasing all of our understanding with one another, through this medium that we have today. So thank you very much, Katsiao, and it's good to see each and every one of you, and those of you that are also participating online. Katsiao.
Well, thank you very much for that, Nakia. And really appreciated hearing your native language, and thank you for sharing that with us. I do want to say that as provost, I arrived here just a little over 7 months ago, having spent most of my life in the state of New York and in Massachusetts. And so it is my introduction to the Pacific Northwest, and I really feel honored and privileged to be here. One of the things that really attracted me to coming to WSU is that we have a long-standing commitment to partnering with and seeking meaningful consultation with Pacific Northwest tribes. My own scholarship is very much in collaboration with tribes and Native peoples in the Northeast United States, and I'm looking forward to being able to continue and strengthen the relationships WSU has as well. We acknowledge their stewardship and caretaking of the lands that WSU currently resides on since time immemorial, and Dr. High Eagle Strong will say more about that in our land acknowledgement. As Native students enroll at WSU, we're also committed to the caretaking of those students in supporting them in both their education and in their lives. And we realize that we can't be strong supporters of Native American students without having strong partnerships with Native American tribes. Therefore, WSU established an MOU with 6 tribal partners back 24 years ago. And since then, 6 additional tribes have signed the MOU. I'll put it in the chat, or I'll ask someone to put in the chat if they have the ability to do so. We have a complete list of signatory tribes on our website. And some of the ways that WSU enacts our part of the MOU agreement is through the establishment of a Native American advisory board to the president that meets biannually. And as provost, I have the honor and opportunity to participate in these advisory board meetings, and it's truly one of the highlights of my position here. These gatherings strengthen our relationships and remind us of our caretaking responsibilities. We regularly consult with our MOU signatory tribes on how WSU can strengthen our institution's policies, our programs, and our practices. For example, we're currently in the process of establishing an executive policy for tribal consultation and engagement, one of the first to be enacted in higher education. And also we have an Office of Tribal Relations to guide WSU in our relationships with tribes and to provide oversight of the Native American programs at WSU as well. Dr. Zoe High Eagle Strong, a Nez Perce tribal member, was appointed to serve in this position, and she's served since January of 2019. Her education background is in educational psychology, and she focuses much of her research with a great deal of passion, I might add, on supporting and advancing Indigenous and Native American education and well-being. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Zoe High Eagle Strong.
Tatsalap. My Indian name is Huku. I was named after my great-great-great-great-grandmother, who was a prisoner of war in Oklahoma. And she was a prisoner because she refused to give up her native ways and religion. So I really accept that as an honor that my father and one of our former elders, Horace Axtell, would give me that name. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you, Ryan and Michael, for planning this special event and ensuring that we begin a time together with the beautiful blessing of Nakia, my relative. And thank you for inviting me to briefly talk about the importance of land acknowledgements. The Jordan let me say this right, Schnitzer, it's an easy word to mess up, Museum is located on the homelands of the Palouse peoples in the Nez Perce, also known as Nimipu. Recently, Chairman Shannon Willard on the Nez Perce Tribal Council stated in a letter to WSU regarding land acknowledgements, he says, these moments of meaningful acknowledgement of Native peoples' homelands and mindfulness of our traditional values of prayer and ceremony are important education opportunities. It also shows our tribal youth that they belong at WSU. You know, Native American peoples, tribes, and cultures are frequently misrepresented and misunderstood. At WSU, we understand that education goes beyond what happens in the classroom. It's exhibitions like Follow the River, Portraits of the Columbia Plateau, where we have an opportunity to model important educational values in which learning should take place in concert with community and through relationships. I had the opportunity to view some of the paintings that will be highlighted today. And if WSU relied on one artist's perspective to educate students or peoples on the Colville people, it would be a very narrow point of view. Another important educational value we have at WSU is to do our best to meaningfully acknowledge the first peoples of the land in which WSU resides on. We do this not only to show our respect for Indigenous peoples as the original caretakers and for carrying a breadth of knowledge that greatly benefits our institution on a daily, regular basis, but we also acknowledge that the Morrill Act of 1862 established land-grant institutions by providing each state with public and federal lands, which are traced back to the disposition of Indigenous lands. In 1890, Washington State received 90,000 acres of Indigenous lands designated to establish Washington State University. WSU retains the majority of these lands to this day. We acknowledge that the disposition of Indigenous lands was often taken by coercive or violent acts and the disregard of treaties. Therefore, we owe our deepest gratitude, apologies, and commitment towards reconciliation. And these education and collaboration with tribes we're committed to, and we know that there's a huge obligation. And I take my job very seriously in that part of the obligation. Beyond the Pullman campus, WSU has a number of campus and extension offices across the state. Currently in Washington State, there are 29 federally recognized tribes, 7 more that are state recognized. In addition, there are 3 tribes in Idaho and 3 in Oregon that also share traditional homelands and waterways, in which is now Washington. And we really recognize all these tribes as we really celebrate our event today. The university expresses its deepest respect for and gratitude towards the original and current caretakers of the region. As an academic community, we acknowledge our responsibility to establish and maintain relationships with these tribes and Native peoples in support of tribal sovereignty and the inclusion of their voices in teaching, research, and programming. I look forward to celebrating this event with you, and we just thank you for to all the tribes that have collaborated and partnered with us to support events like this. So thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you, Zoe. And before I get started, I'd really like to give a few thanks, if I could, to some of our partners. I know Ryan's already mentioned a couple, but first I think I'd personally like to thank the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art and the opportunity to work with Ryan this last year extensively on this exhibit. It's been a challenging time for all of us, and for so many of our students and my colleagues and others, as business as usual was not as usual. And we've done our best in so many ways to try to continue on with the things that matter to us. And this exhibit had its challenges, but the importance of us persevering, I think, touches on all the things that were mentioned prior. And that's been really important to us. So I want to thank you, Ryan, for an opportunity to continue to work with you and partnership that we've carried on for many years, that's continued from our time together at the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture in Spokane. And I know you also mentioned, of course, our colleagues there at the MAC and in the Museum of Anthropology, Department of Anthropology has been fabulous. But also, I'd like to acknowledge those at the Colville Confederated Tribes, particularly some of the Nez Perce elders and friends that have helped me as I was working with this exhibit. Same at the Confederated Tribes of the Salish Kootenai. I just can't tell you that the opportunity to speak with family members, descendants, people that knew some of the people that were painted in the images that I'll be talking about, gave me an opportunity that I never anticipated prior to this project. And I'm really thankful for everyone's time and commitment and support and help on that. Same with my colleagues. And I know I could spend the whole rest of my time giving thanks to everyone, but these are the sort of things that you rely on so many people to get you to the places that you ultimately want to be. And it would be remiss of me not to offer thanks to my colleagues, my department chair, others, my family, of course, loved ones, and equally mentors that I've had along the way that still stay in touch with me. So without further ado, I would like to just maybe give you a little bit of background on where this exhibit really developed in many ways. I want to let you know that the exhibit in some ways started with an idea that was going to be an exhibit at WSU Tri-Cities. And that was the real intentions of that I was wanting to work with some of our colleagues at Tri-Cities on an exhibition specifically with some of these paintings that were related to the Yakima. And my intention and goal at the time, working with Ryan and some of our peers, there was to use some of the collections, some of the paintings to present in the art gallery there at Tri-Cities, a representation of the indigenous people's homelands where WSU Tri-City lies on the Yakima homelands at the mouth of the Yakima River there on the Columbia. And as we all know, this last year changed so many things, and this was one of the things that was changed. And as unfortunate as was, as disappointing as that was, Ryan and I continued the conversations and realized we had an opportunity here to continue on what I think Provost Chilton and others have talked about is WSU's commitment to working with our kind of educational mission on how we want to speak about, in many ways, our conversation here was to decolonize the museum, how we can be candid about the collections that we have, how they've been interpreted, and how they can be reinterpreted and shared, particularly for our students, an opportunity for them to understand more about our past, but also what we can say about where we're going and what we're about today. And that was a real opportunity that we took advantage of and spent a significant amount of time working together on this. So that's in some ways the background that I really wanted to present with all of you. And so it's touched in that recognition of the land, the homelands, that we always want our students to be aware of. And it's also about our ability to be critical with ourselves as an institution, because we ask our students all the time to think critically and have that ability to look at things from different perspectives and have different points of view. Sometimes that might be very challenging, and that was something that we were willing to do here, and that was something that Ryan and I worked together with our peers at the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture in Spokane. We absolutely carry on here, and it's something that we're very committed to. So with that, I want to present my first image that I have, and I could surely spend the rest of the time talking solely just about this image from Worth Griffin, whose portraits that we have on display here in the gallery. And this is of Eleanor Nanamkin. And a little background on Worth Griffin. He was a former department chair from the mid-1920s for the next 34 years here in Washington State College at that time. And really was leader of the department. And he received in the mid-1930s a grant that from the Board of Regents and the President Holland that allowed him to travel within the region to do a series of portrait paintings of regional pioneers that they wanted to really highlight. He used his experience, his past experience. He came from Chicago. He did his degree at the Chicago Art Institute. He worked at an advertising agency, led that in Chicago, made his way out west. And one of his areas of expertise was portraiture. And the opportunity at that time to do portraits of the regional pioneers was well received, but the opportunity that came from that was to extend that and then to paint some of the regional people from the indigenous tribes of this region. And that was something that we have here. And in many ways, that's what he's most noted for, are these series of portraits that you see. This is an oil painting that's probably about 2.5 by 3.5 feet. And it's sadly, I'm not going to be reading too much from my little notepad, but I will read this for you because this is what would be on the back of the painting. If you flipped it around, there was a little note that he had of the people that he painted on his trip up to Nez Perce in 1935. And this was what he stated about Eleanor Nanamkin. Was born in 1920, was the daughter of George Nanamkin, the United States government interpreter for the Indian Agency at Nez Perce. In many ways, this is kind of standard. A very short, brief bio. It's not so different than what we might see a lot of times in the museum world if we have a cultural object, and it might just state what the object is, what it's made from, what tribal affiliation it is, and maybe what the era is. Very little cultural context, very little more information for the viewer, and that's not much different here. What I can tell you was George Nanamkin was the great-grandson of Chief Auhai, a well-known Yakima chief. The Nanamkins were also Wenatchee. They are also Eniat. And they're still an important part of our reservation on the Colville Indian Reservation. And these are the things that when I thought about working with this series of paintings, that I was really committed to trying to get more information, to contextualize them in a different way and provide that for our audience. One of the other things that, while I'm on this painting, I promise I'll move past it here in a second, because I think it's important. I had this opportunity almost 2 years ago. It was fall of 2019, which seems years ago after this last year, believe me. But I taught the graduate seminar in fine arts, and I was working with our graduate students on a research project. And I was able to utilize the resources here at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, their Collection Study Resource Center. And I had the students go into the collections and pick a particular painting that they want to speak about. The emphasis of my graduate seminar was on Native American art, contemporary Native American art. And I had one of my students who chose this painting of Eleanor. And the comments that she made based on some of our readings, some of the films that we saw, this one, what she'd mentioned was from a video we saw from Cree filmmaker Neil Diamond, and that's his name. But the film that he did was called Real Injuns. And in that film, he made this comment about Native Americans wearing headbands, and that this really wasn't common at all until the early film industry. Because during the early film industry, you had non-natives playing Native Americans in red face and wigs. And as they wore wigs, of course, they had to keep them on as they're doing their things, and they kind of put these headbands on. And after that, that became a thing later. And so in her comments, in her responses, in her paper, she didn't know if this was true or not, as it was in relationship to Eleanor, because there was no other information. She couldn't find much of anything to contextualize that. But that wasn't really the point, as she indicated. And what she was concerned about in some ways is maybe what I'll use as a springboard for the remainder of my presentation, is that what we had spoke about in the class and what I want to present for our audience in this exhibition is this sense, this expectation of what Native Americans are supposed to be, what we expect them to look like, how we expect them to be presented, whether it be as the subject matter for a painting, in film, and all the implications that go along with that. This sense of what is authenticity, all these kind of concepts were things that impact Native American people then, and it surely does to this day. And this was something that we wanted to kind of take further in our class, and I wanted to utilize some of the images, some of the materials that we have to speak about that. And so without further ado, I'll move on, because I don't want to make assumptions as we're speaking today, and I'm talking about Nez Perce and the Colville Indian Reservation, that everyone knows exactly where that is. Because I anticipate there are people here in our audience that are not from this region. But of course, this is northeastern Washington, the northern plateau, the Columbia River, upper Columbia River Plateau. And as you can see there, Nez Perce is the center of the Colville Reservation. It's where the Indian Agency is, across the river from the Spokane Reservation, not too far from the Kalispell, and then you can see the Coeur d'Alene Reservation just over the border there in Idaho. The relationship, of course, with all these tribes that you can see in kind of a maybe just a little subtle tone is that what's left of their traditional homelands, almost the whole complete northeastern part of eastern Washington used to be traditional tribal homelands. And of course, that's another presentation, another lecture on what happened to those homelands after they were removed time and time again, particularly through the allotment era. As I was working and trying to put together this presentation, I actually kind of dug through some of my family's photographs. And what is here is an image of Nez Perce from early 1950s. It was probably a photograph my mother had, and you know, for many people that have never been, and most people never had traveled to many of the Native American, the Indian reservations that were within their region. But for those that did, that were from off the reservation, this is what you might see in downtown Nez Perce. And of course, this is the Teepee Cafe, but it was also the Indian Agency, and there was the whole complex there that where a lot of the natives went for their health and other kind of resources and working with the federal government. And I say this because I have memories, my family talked about going to Nez Perce. They lived outside of Nez Perce on the reservation in much more kind of rural areas, and they were going to the big town when they went to Nez Perce. Of course, it's not a big town, and it wasn't then, and it isn't now per se, but that was their community. And this is what most people maybe think about when they would think about Nez Perce if they weren't from the region. And this is from our MASC, our Manuscript Archive Special Collections here at WSU. And it's an image of the powwow, probably the 4th of July powwow, which has been happening since the late 19th century. Chief Joseph and with the help of Chief Moses, established this, and it continues to this day. It's very important with the tribal community. And this is what maybe other people would think about when they think of Nez Perce, and particularly at that time when the painting of Elnor Nanamkin was painted. And so if I move on from this, we can see what Worth Griffin was paying attention to as he went back to Nez Perce. So his first series of portraits, which are behind me here in the museum, and that I am going to speak a little bit about, are the basis of this collection, but also are some of the drawings that the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art acquired recently from his kind of portfolio from that time at Nez Perce. And in some ways, I find these much more interesting, and I could speak so much more about them because I feel that they present certain things of that time period that was very important to speak about then and today. Just simple things as the little stovepipe coming out of the kind of tent that you see, these are the things that would be natural. And that's how it was. If you'd been to the Nez Perce powwow, it is as warm as it is in July. Sometimes it can get kind of cool at night, but they also use these for cooking. These are the things that we would naturally see. Here we are again, the wood stove and a little bit of the kind of landscape and some of the designs, but this was kind of the community that one would see. And I think that's really helpful, not just for kind of giving us an image of when people would come together, which they did then and they do to this day. People would come from tribal reservations all over eastern Washington and the inland Northwest to the 4th of July powwow. And it would be a place of people coming together with family members again, people coming and dancing and singing together, gambling together. And this is something that I felt was much more kind of accessible to me, knowing that region, being a part of that. And something as simple as this image of the gentlemen with their horses, with their vests and their kind of jeans and the accoutrements that one would have at that time, and their hats, of course, but with the houses that we see in the background. And what I think were just studies for him from the time that he was at Nez Perce, kind of paying attention to what was going on there, in some ways are the most humanistic and the most honest of the images that we have in this exhibition. And they're quite nicely done. Worth Griffin had spent some time prior in another kind of grant that he received, a fellowship that he went down to Mexico and did a series of similar kind of studies. So this was really in his wheelhouse, so to say. This was something he was very adept at, and I think in many ways adds to the breadth of our understanding of what was going on at that time, and something we can appreciate quite a bit. My first experience with Worth Griffin was this painting on the right. When I was leaving my first graduate degree at Gonzaga in 1991, and I was accepted here at WSU for my graduate degree in fine arts. That summer before I started my program, the museum had a small exhibition of Worth Griffin's paintings in the gallery, and I had walked in and I saw this painting of Chief Jim James, and I was really taken aback because I did not know at all who Worth Griffin was, let alone that these paintings existed. And there's so much I could say about Chief Jim James because so many of our family, the people that knew him, I wasn't alive when he died. I think he passed the year before I was born. But everyone had a story about him, and it was wonderful growing up listening to that and the importance he held for our people, our community, as a part of the Sampoil, as a part of that region that took on that responsibility as our hereditary chief. And I remember going home back to Omak to speak with my mother's family and asking my grandmother and others if they knew about these portraits. that were at WSU, and they didn't. They couldn't really remember. Maybe someone heard about that, but I was really surprised because they were quite remarkable, and I thought people would remember that. But in reflection, I realized so much had happened for our people from the 1930s up into 1990 when I saw these here at WSU in Pullman. And it just wasn't the depression that everyone was going through at that time. There were so many changes, so many things that took place for our people between World War II, the Depression, but also the transformation of our tribal communities by the development of Grand Coulee Dam. All these things had happened, and maybe thinking back to a brief 4 years of an art colony, these paintings that were done at Nez Perce might have been easy to forget. And I realized that at that time. And two of the paintings that I wanted to highlight that are a part of this exhibition from Worth Griffin, from that grant that he received when he went up with Clifford Still to Nez Perce to do the first studies, here are Virginia Williams and Joe Red Thunder. I had never met Virginia Williams. And I did have an opportunity to meet Joe Red Thunder a number of times through my grandmother and my family there in Omak, where he and his wife would come to visit. And so I was looking at these paintings and just amazed because of, well, one, Joe was so much younger, and it was such a remarkable study of them, and they were quite different. But there, once again, was really no contextual information. There was very little information at all about who these people were. And if it was, it might reflect something important that maybe Worth Griffin felt was important to them. And particularly if they were related to someone famous or someone important. That seemed to kind of be the standard. And that, once again, was not unique to Worth Griffin, that kind of presentation of Native people that reflected a hierarchy, particularly of males, and also of important war chiefs, or that seemed to be kind of the information that one might find. I had the opportunity to work with one of our tribal elders, Albert Andrews, that I mentioned with much respect before, and Virginia Williams with his mother. And he was able to offer some wonderful insight, not only to this painting, but to speak about who his mother was and how important she was as a woman of our community, of the Longhouse at Nez Perce. And these were those kind of stories that I said that really kind of changed and impacted the way I thought about the work that I was doing to really touch the connection of these people and their relatives that are still alive to this day, and the importance of that. Worth Griffin and Clifford Still and other art faculty here at Washington State College at that time, after this series of portraits were created here in the gallery, went on to create the Nez Perce Art Colony prior to World War II. And they brought students from not just Washington State College, but students from all over the country, some as far as New York, to Pullman, and then some, most up to Nez Perce, where they spent the summers painting. And they stayed there at Nez Perce, and they worked in a gymnasium, and they painted a number of paintings, worked in the hot summer. I can only imagine how hot that, where they were working was, but it was something that was promoted. Absolutely, this idea of this art colony, as there were many happening at that time during the Depression, to come up to the Northwest, the inland Northwest, and meet with tribal people of many tribes, before they disappear in so many ways. This, once again, this kind of authentic experience of meeting real Native people, and this whole kind of presentation expectation that Native people ultimately were going to disappear, and this was your chance to kind of document them, to interact with them, and to be amongst their tribal people and their community. And that was an absolute kind of promotion that they had for this. And so here, of course, is one of the people that sat, an important person, Chief Willie Red Star. And beyond that, it was something that the students worked on that was an extension of what they were trying to do here at Pullman. When I look at this, there's so many things when I see this image, I think about just trying to get everyone to paint. And I love this because I anticipate that some of my painting students are out there and watching this presentation right now. And I'm always trying to tell them, I understand how difficult it is when you're taking a painting. Of course, it's difficult, and just to get the paint to work, to manage it, to use your skill sets that we're trying to develop, all these things that we talk about in fine arts that we want students to be able to work on, achieve. I can speak to it just in that, just mixing the paint on the palette, applying it. But also, we talk about what content is versus subject matter. The subject matter, of course, is the person sitting there that they're painting. The content goes beyond that, how we paint them, the emotion, what we do with that, all the artist's choices that go in to that. And somewhere in that, maybe there's an opportunity to engage with the model a bit differently, where there's something happening together. But nevertheless, it comes right with kind of expectations, with tropes, with stereotypes, all these things we can look at and speak to now. And I'm not certain that any of that was discussed at that time. But these paintings are out there, they exist. And it's something I think that we have the ability to appreciate in one respect, but speak to with what we know today. And I think that's the benefit of being able to speak to some of these challenges of when we really don't have much more content, information, interaction about what else was going on with the people at that time. And it wasn't just kind of a quick in and out experience. And we know that now. And I would really want to emphasize that because it's very important, not just for interpretation, but to recognize the communities that we're committed to and working with here at WSU. As I finish up today, one of the things I wanted to do was just kind of speak to something else that we have here in the exhibition, and it's some of the objects that we have on display, the cultural objects, material objects, that in many ways I spoke with Ryan about that we want to use and present in a way of identifying this ongoing transformation of Native arts and culture. If there was ever an example to speak to that Native Americans are not static, there's not this one particular moment in time where we were all Native and there was this authenticity to who we were without maybe being soiled by the impact of Western culture. And we were, this kind of ideal. I would say our arts are a great way to speak to that. And here we have 2 flat twine bags from the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture in Spokane. These are part of the Manning collection. And the reason I highlight these 2 flat twine bags that are imbricated is as much as they have traditional designs in some ways with the mountain design or other kind of cultural designs, the materials that are being used are important to speak about because we might have ryegrass, beargrass, Indian hemp or dog bane, those traditional materials, but we start to see the integration of materials that came into the communities, such as actual dye that replaced traditional natural dyes. We have different opportunity of different colors and pigments, and those were absolutely used and engaged with the tribal artists. We start to change from traditional materials to what we have are corn husk, where they start to take the corn husk and twine that instead of maybe the other materials. And they had access to that and they started to change that, but still kept the flat twine bag. So once again, the arts reflect this ongoing fluid engagement with new materials, new media, but retaining the important aspects that these things held within our community. And this is absolutely true for the other materials we have on display, which are the beaded bags that we work with. And what was so nice about this, working both with the Museum of Anthropology and the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture, talking with both Diane and Tisa, that we were able to recognize some of the shared things that each collections had, but I wanted to present these type of images. These are very old, they're 100+ years old. To anyone else, they would be seen as very traditional in many ways, kind of materials that the women would carry. But we can see they're very modern. They surely were at the time. They were utilizing actual different imagery. They were using figurative work. They were using new beads. They were integrating found objects. They were repurposing clutches, purses, as in my dear friend and colleague Tisa Matheson would say, these bags and the flat twine bags were the Gucci bags that the women had and would carry at that time. And it's true, whether it was at particular, powwows or ceremonies, these were very important. And so the artistic kind of investment, but utilizing new imagery, other things, was natural. And we could see it with the patriotic bags that speak to a particular time after 1924 when Native Americans became U.S. citizens, and to other kind of images that they would start to see in maybe modern and popular media, the way to kind of create that. This was so important, and I think this is our way of kind of showing throughout the exhibition that these images that we're looking at are not pointing at one moment in time that once was. It's a point of time that was fluid, where people were continuing and moving through different things that we all share as human beings, but they had their experience of theirs. And the arts and that, and what the people were wearing in the images speak to that. Thank you. One of the other things we finished up with in this exhibit that is very important to address is the ceremony of tears. Is when this underlining theme that kind of goes around the exhibit was all these things were happening at the time when Grand Coulee Dam was being built. So the great achievement, kind of technical industrial achievement of that era that did so much for Eastern Washington, that did so much for the region, that provided electricity, that benefited the irrigation during the war. All these things had absolute effect on the traditional homelands of the people that lived there. Not just on the Colville Indian Reservation, but upriver all the way into Canada. That went, it impacted so many communities when the salmon and that river changed, and the people that lived through that held on to the things that are important, that gave us the strength of who we are today, the determination to keep what's important to us and to uphold that while we kind of continue through this change, is the thing that I think is so valuable. And when I look at these images and I see that, I see these elders, I see these people that gave us strength, that continue to mean so much to us, and that have the opportunity to work with us here at WSU, that continue to share with us, to not only try to benefit our community, our Native students, and all of us that are here, but they want to share that and present that to everyone, so they can maybe understand how important this place is and why it means so much to us, and maybe that in turn will add a little more breadth of value and understanding. And I think that's something we absolutely are committed to here with this exhibit and at WSU, and it surely is with the partners that we've been working with, and I want to thank you very much. Lemlems.
Nikia, if we can now return to you for concluding remarks, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Michael and Ryan and everybody for putting this together, and really add in some context and insight to these very amazing images that stand alone in terms of the imagery and their artistic representation of these ancestors from the Colville Reservation. That, of course, those relationships and kinships reach out to a much broader area, as Michael had mentioned. And I think it's really important the way Michael had contextualized these. As a painter myself, is that especially a portrait is a kind of a snapshot in time, whether it's a photographic portrait or it's a painting such as these ones. And during that time period, I was really glad to have him contextualize the broader time in which these had happened and in which they were painted. And during that time, as with a lot of historic photography, many of our people were treated as subjects and very much dehumanized. And I was at least thankful that their names were documented, and that I think allowed for a broader conversation, which I think Michael opened the door for bringing in the voices of the family and to bring in the voices of our people and our elders, and to really humanize, what these paintings really mean and what they represent to us. And as for myself, I'm really someone who is very visual, and I really and connected to imagery, historic photography, and for me to look into the faces of our ancestors and to understand that they were very resilient. And in my mind, when I think of our ancestors, I don't think of them as victims. I think of the resiliency that they showed and endured everything that they had to do to bring us to this point. So I think it gives me a time, to reflect on that strength that they showed and what they were able to leave for us to carry on for the generations. And so, for me, that's what this represents. And I think it connects to a lot what the Washington State University is about, and having empowering Native voices and through leadership positions like the position Zoe holds, which is very important to not only the Nez Perce tribe, but also, all the tribal people who she advocates for, as well as all people. And I think, for the most part, it's important in this time that we live in to find ways to recognize the humanity that we all share. And I think, these paintings really truly do that, but only with the voices and the stories and the knowledge as a way and a mechanism to understand and to fully understand the experience of Native people, the experience of our elders, and again that it hasn't ended, it continues today. So again, I could thank everybody, Provost Chilton and everybody involved, and those that have participated online. And this was very much a enlightening experience for me, and I'm very thankful to participate.
Everyone, I think this concludes our program this evening. I want to really thank all of our speakers today for such a special time together, and Michael in particular for an amazing presentation. Thank you also to everyone that's joined us. I see we had a really tremendous turnout online, so thank you for coming and spending this time together. I would like to plug that the museum has reopened as of Tuesday of this week. And so I'd encourage you to consider a visit to see Michael's tremendous exhibition in person. We have safe visitation guidelines on our website that you can take a look at. Please have a nice evening, and thank you again.